Hey guys, so in this video I wanted to give some programming help / advice because this is something that I get asked quite a bit, and I think this is something that is kind of a little bit lesser known for lots of people who are coming into powerlifting and they hear about this thing called DUP, which is going to be daily undulating periodization. And this is basically a concept used in programming that is mainly used with late beginners to intermediates and advanced lifters. And the main reason why that is the case is because as you get more advanced, you cannot progress linearly anymore. When you are a ranked beginner, you basically want to keep your programming as simple as possible with strength and just do a linear periodization, where essentially say you're doing a 5x5 for example. And you basically want to be doing that multiple times per week because you can add 5 pounds, 10 pounds, multiple times a week and milk out a faster rate of progression, because when you are more of a beginner, you're not as well adapted to the current training stimulus, and therefore you can actually make larger jumps in load and make faster strength progress. And you basically want to progress linearly for as long as you possibly can. Once you become more of a late beginner, intermediate, advanced athlete, your rate of adaptation slows down just because your body gets a little bit more used to the stimulus. You're also probably stronger, so the actual recovery cost per net exercise, stimulus that you do, that's overloading, which basically is going to trigger a later strength or muscle adaptation. Just has a higher fatigue cost, and we need to manage that by training more underlying qualities of strength. And mainly, what DUP does is it takes into account the three main ones, which is going to be technique, actual force production, so strength, and then hypertrophy or muscle size. And you're going to train those subsystems more on different days and throughout the whole training microcycle to make the best adaptations that we possibly can, and still make progress, but we're kind of extending out the progression in the sense artificially, in order to allow for those adaptations to actually come in more full force. Also, as you do become a little bit more intermediate or whatever, you can actually skew DUP in the sense of what you mostly need to be working on, or like wherever stage that you're at in your training cycle or whatever. So, for example, what I mean by that is, say you're further away from competition, and we want to build more work capacity, more muscle mass to potentially future strength. Maybe if you're doing a 3 times a week free frequency, maybe we're doing more of a hypertrophy bias even on our strength days. So, like, for example, we're doing a little bit heavier. We're still doing higher reps on average, so we can get more total volume, but we are allowing ourselves to also have other hypertrophy day that's a little bit higher volume too. But it's not like as heavy. So like maybe we're not doing like heavy triples on our strength days or for our top sets. Maybe we're doing more of a sets of 4, 5, 6, and then having more back downs that are a little bit higher, 5 to 10 reps. That could be skewed. Or then maybe as you get closer to a competition, and you want to maximize the neural potential, maybe your hypertrophy days start to look a little bit more like strength days. So maybe top sets of maybe you're doing 4s and 5s and 6s instead of doing 5s through 10s on that, and you're also doing a little bit less variation on those days. So I'm going to go over a little bit about like how you set up each of these days, and end the video with examples of how I with like a couple clients with how that looks for them. So first, with strength days, these are basically going to be your most competition specific days. So think of heavy competition squatting. We're going to probably want to use the heaviest absolute lows in terms of absolute percentages, since intensity is going to be the number one driver of strength progress per set. So basically, the higher intensity that you're doing, the more specific it is to competition, and the more strength, basically the more strength you're going to be getting from that one set, neural adaptations as a whole. So usually on this day, you'll see something like a heavy top set, and then back down sets as a percentage or whatnot of that absolute top set. These are also going to be most competition specific. So you're actually doing your comp bench, comp squat, comp deadlift. You can also put in some variations. Maybe you're doing like further out, you're doing more of a pause deadlift, pause squat, long pause bench, as to actually create, practice the skill components. Maybe make it a little more self-limiting in the sense of, you can't do as much weight on a pause squat as you can on a absolute squat, and maybe that allows you to get a little more, volume in total because there's less of a fatigue depth further away from competition or whatnot. So that's basically what the strength days are going to be like. I also tend to like to buy strength days for my powerlifters later on in the training week, if at all possible, on at least 2 of the 3 lifts, because that allows us to line up our acute fatigue patterns, which is basically like, what days are you the strongest on during the training week later on in the week, so that aligns a little better with competition, so that when you taper things down, the fatigue patterns are a little bit more predictable. But you usually want to have about 72 hours of rest if you're doing 2 times a week of strength frequency on your strength days to allow for full neural recovery, since the nervous system usually needs about 72 hours of recovery to actually be return to baseline, also have that adaptation. However, if you're doing more of a 3 times a week free frequency and you have a technique or power day, you should place that before strength days, and because this is like low RPE, not really supposed to be usually lower volume, mostly just skill for practice, and also lower RPE. There's going to be not much muscle damage or neural fatigue, but still probably want to have about 24 to 48 hours before that. But essentially, like one example of this could be, you do a top single at 8 on comp squat, and you do a percentage back at a minus 10% load on your strength day, to get that skill of practice. And again, this is going to be the highest, absolute percentages that you're working in during the overall training week to help, maximize actual strength, on that day. Now the second day is going to be like more of a hypertrophy day or a volume day. You're going to have the highest absolute volumes. You also want to place these more like right after your strength days, not like before. So say usually I want to have about 48 hours after a strength day or whatnot is what I find to be what good practice, just because you're not going to have, there's muscle damage, there's higher volume, which means that there's longer recovery interference with strength production, since if you have more muscle damage, you basically are going to be getting more muscle fibers that innervate the, and that basically that is going to have a consequence on how much of the neurons that you're actually innervating those muscle fibers are going to actually be able to produce force and contract, which is going to help things contribute to strength. Hypertrophy is a super important underlying characteristic of strength. Basically, more cross-sectional area, the stronger or the bigger muscle that you have, the more potential it has to be stronger. You can kind of think of this as, if you really want to have a really fast car, if you only have a V4, there's only so much, you can make that faster with how much you mod it. But if you have a really big engine like a V8, then like once you add on like more mods, you can add more mods onto it. You can make it go even faster. So that's kind of like why hypertrophy is so important. But also, these also help build up your work capacity, and work capacity is important because it's going to allow you to perform and recover from more training volume. And all else being equal, the more training volume that you can perform and recover from, the more absolute stimulus that you're going to have for strength, and then probably the better strength progress you're going to have. It's a little bit, there's some nuances to that, but that's essentially what they found. This is also a day when you want to maybe perform some more variations. So like a high bar squat, close grip bench press, a Romanian deadlift, maybe a higher volume, opposite stance deadlift, just to kind of get a little bit more range of motion, some more novelty, maybe work on some other muscle fibers that you need to just work on. So like for example, for myself, I have small arms and I have a very long range of motion on bench press, and so close grip bench press would be a smart idea for me, because that's going to get a little more longer range of motion, help train my lockout a little bit better, and whatnot. And high bar squat's really great because you're going to have lower fatigue cost, be able to put a lot more tension on the quads because there's more forward knee travel, and whatnot. So that's one example. Example of this would be, pause comp squat top set at 5, and then 3x8 at minus 10 to 15% load. Another thing I like to do is like repeat sets. So what that could look like is for example, is maybe instead of doing this and then the down sets, you're going to do like a paused comp squat, and maybe you're doing a, we're doing sets of 6, 1 by 6 at RPE 6, and then you're going to have paused comp squat, and you're going to have a 3 by 6 after that, where you're going to just repeat the load. This is going to, the RPE is going to climb as you do this. This is also a useful tool that I kind of like to use with like rating last at RPE, seeing like how fast does a lifter fatigue. So I kind of know like how much of a, how many sets, I need to give them, because usually I don't want them fatiguing more than about 2 RPEs above what I gave them for that set, just to help manage fatigue a little bit. But this is also a great way to induce some hypertrophy. Now, the last time of day is when you have a technique day or a power day, and this is just to get a little bit extra skill practice with low fatigue cost, and maybe work on some ranges of motion that you're weak at, or some parts of the lift that you're not as good at. So, for example, on deadlift, usually I'm either going to have like a strength day and a hypertrophy day, or a technique day as we get more close to competition. Or this would basically look like, say, a strength day, we're doing an actual competition deadlift. Then on technique day, we're doing a pause deadlift, a low RPE. Or maybe we really want to get some more hypertrophy of the main movers, so do like an RDL or on a hypertrophy day. It's still low fatigue, but that's an example. But low fatigue skill practice, not really supposed to be super hard. You should feel like you're moving weight, you're getting some good blood flow around, but it should not be very fatiguing. You should not be even close to grinding out anything. Very low velocity loss on these days. And usually these are only implemented with a 3 times a week frequency, with the exception of the deadlift, because the deadlift usually has the lowest potential for overload throughout the training week. You should only implement with 3 times a week plus frequency, because that's kind of the only way that you can get like really high exertion levels that frequently. And that usually, like, it depends on the person, but there's only so much you really can overload throughout the training week. And usually our 2 most overloading days are going to be hypertrophy and strength days. And then technique days are going to also be there just to improve your scope of practice. For example, I'm going to program a long pause bench, and for like a lifter who has a hard time. Maybe they sink their bench press too much. Maybe they don't have much tension in their legs when they're setting up their arch. And I want them to have a little more control off the chest. So that's why I would program a pause bench press. Or if you want to program in low fatigue, low RPE, pause deadlift work, so that the lifter can improve their starting position. That's kind of the whole example of that. So this is kind of like an overview of what things look like, and I'm going to show you a couple examples of programming for my clients and point out kind of how I program for this. So here's an example of somebody who's close to competition. This is one of my clients, Oscar, who is a few weeks out from the qualifying meet for Swedish nationals. I'm just kind of going to show you like how this looks. So this is going to be like more of his hypertrophy / volume day. I do program in like some variation just to help out with his positioning on this, but you can see how there's a little bit of, I have a repeat set, a down set too, and it just kind of just goes to show, a little bit higher volumes and whatnot on his squat. And then his primary day is going to have, the highest absolute loads, and get some more of that strength actual practice. And then you can also see others, 48 hours before that, his hypertrophy day and his actual strength day. Looking at deadlift, you have his main strength day being earlier on in the week. I do like programming deadlift usually on primary days a little bit earlier on in the week, or I will put squat earlier on in the week. It just depends on what's better for that client and their schedule. And I'm not opposed to playing around with it, but again, highest absolute loads, percentage back down sets, a top set, and then this is going to have a technique day because of pause cluster sets at a lower RPE. Just because he's closer to competition, he's going to get a little more skill practice and whatnot. Now, looking at his bench, this is going to be his technique day. Oscar needs a little bit more volume because he's a little bit smaller of a lifter, and he just benefits from it. So I have a top set of 5 and a 3x6, but again, it's super low, like 6 RPE and like 10% load drop. We're taking him down to like a 3 or 4 RPE, and he's not going to be above a 6 RPE. And that's kind of by the end of this, and that's kind of why I program in percentages. Like when I program in like percentage load drops, it's not like it's just some arbitrary like, oh, blah blah blah, like random like load drop. I'm trying to actually create a certain training effect and manage fatigue when I do the program in things. Usually I don't want them going above the RPE that I did give. And if I do have a percentage drop, unless I have a repeat load, just right after, I'm okay with fatigue rising. And this is primary bench day, right after that technique day, highest loads again. And then his hypertrophy day, he's having more of a cold script, comp bench and Larson press, just to train some skill aspect and also get some extra hypertrophy of the primary movers in a competition specific manner. Now this is going to be my other client Trayton, who's further out from his meet. You can kind of see some of the differences. So there's a lot higher volumes because as the training cycle goes along, we're trying to kind of have linear periodization where we're going to be slowly increasing competition specificity usually, but it depends on the lifter. Like for example, I don't do comp squats twice a week. I do one day of safety bar squats, and then one day of comp squat. That doesn't change going into my meet. This is what I found works best for me. But I'll slowly be increasing average intensity by lowering down the reps over time. So he is, his meet is going to be on the 2nd of April. So right now we're doing more of a volume phase, like work capacity, having a high bar pause squat for his squat, and then a percentage back down of that. Higher volume, and then you can also see how on a strength day we're still doing some decently heavy work, but it's self-limiting in the sense that the absolute intensity is not as high because we're doing a 3 count eccentric comp squat. That's something I like to do a little bit further out from competition, is because it helps potentiate better technique, and we can also get some heavier like relative loading like RPEs. But with a little less of a fatigue cost. Then on deadlift, you have his primary deadlift day. Again, pause deadlift, just again, more self-limiting variation. And then it can also, we're still getting more higher volumes, sets of 5 and 6. And then hypertrophy day for his secondary day with an RDL. And then for bench press, we have his hypertrophy day first in the week, comp bench and Larson press. Then we have his technique day with the 3 count comp bench, eccentric comp bench, with a pretty big percentage back down. Again, I'm assuming that with this he's not going to go above a 6 RPE. Trayton doesn't fatigue as fast as some of my other lifters. And then we have our main strength day later on in the week, a little bit higher volumes and whatnot. So that's just kind of an example of how you can apply it to different lifters based off their needs and whatnot. So hopefully that makes sense, but this is kind of like how DUP kind of looks like for different lifters and whatnot, a general brief overview. So if you guys have any questions, ask them down in the comment section below. If you guys are interested in coaching or programming, you want to get some, good stuff like this for yourself that's individualized, shoot me a DM on Instagram or apply to coaching down below. Talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.